Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video and myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the second part thereof for the 6th of July 2025, and we'll be concerning ourselves mainly with topics to do with the war in Ukraine. We'll have a little bit of a sidebar in the middle and then continue on our way. We're going to start with Slovakia again blocking the latest sanctions in Brussels. The other day the discussions were only at the ambassadorial level, but their leader Robert Fico ordered his politicians to continue consultations with the European Commission on energy resources. This is the 18th set of sanctions that the EU is trying to put together to lay on the Russians, and Slovakia and Hungary are in opposition. Slovakia want to carve out their own exemptions, particularly concerning the exports, the Russian exports of hydrocarbons, indeed to Slovakia, so we have to see how that develops. It still doesn't seem to have got to the next stage. The EU is to help Moldova fight hybrid attacks from agents of autocracy, von der Leyen has said ahead of the September election in Moldova, which many people are worried about, given the influence that we've already seen on the presidential elections there and on the elections in Romania and indeed in Poland. Quote, who is behind those attacks is clear to all of us here. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said, with reference to attacks, information attacks, cyber attacks on Moldova and those aforementioned nations. Now, let's look at one of these nations that has undue Russian influence, Hungary. New polls are showing that the opposition leader Peter Magyar has a brutal lead, according to Geopolitics in Hungary. Viktor Orban's allies claim the polls are fake, but their frantic efforts to blame Magyar for every problem suggest that they are scared. Just 10 months to go until Hungary's parliamentary election, and we're almost at a 20% differential between Tisza, the new party on the block, and Fidesz, the authoritarian right-wing populist party run by Viktor Orban, going down from 59%, is that, down to 34%. Really good news. It might be 54%. Really good news for the those who desire Hungary to return to the halcyon days of democracy. But yeah, there you go. Now, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has been talking an awful lot recently about how Russia are the bad guys. He's been very overt concerning what I think the obvious reality. What is the obvious reality of Russia influencing the countries in Europe? Not just influencing, but overtly attacking the countries in Europe. I've long maintained that we're in World War III at the moment. We just don't realize it. We are at war with Russia. Russia is at war with us. You know, whether we see ourselves as at war with Russia might be a different thing, but Russia is at war with us. Russia is attacking us, Europe, the United States, the EU, on a daily basis. And Friedrich Merz is very cognizant of this. I was asked a question in the recent live stream with Tim White. Someone said, you know, who is the leader in Europe? Who should we focus on in terms of driving Europe to support Ukraine? And I think Friedrich Merz is really positioning himself to be that person, because he is not only the German leader, and Germany are so fundamental to the direction of the EU. You've got Germany and France, big players in the EU. Even places like the Netherlands, just the population isn't big enough. Right? If you want to lead Europe, I think you need to be in Italy, Germany, Spain, France, and I would have said the UK in years gone past. And Keir Starmer, the UK, could be the leading support for Ukraine. I think we are definitely in there. I mean, you got Poland as well these days. Sorry. But Friedrich Merz is positioning himself to be that man, to be the linchpin in the nations who are coalescing around support for Ukraine. And he is very obviously blaming Russia, and I think justifiably so. Quote, Russia is already attacking us today. The infrastructure. We have attacks, arson attacks. What has also happened in barracks here in recent days, and I'm not even sure about that. The trails almost all lead to Russia. I think he is really driving Europe forward in recognizing Russia as not only the aggressor, but as the daily enemy of Europe. that they are attacking Europe. Germany is preparing, and in that whole context, preparing to introduce a voluntary 6-month military service scheme to boost its reserve forces and strengthen its defense, according to Reuters. The plan, driven by growing concerns over Russia, aims to attract recruits for basic roles like guard duties, with the option of a draft if too few volunteer. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius hopes to grow the armed forces from 180,000 to 260,000 troops and double the current 100,000 reservists. Pistorius wants to have the legislation passed by the end of the next month, with the first recruits to start training from May 2026. This is very much in light of Russia being the threat that it is. So Europe parts of Europe are waking up, particularly Eastern Europe. Poland has been doing this for some time, gearing up its military spending, outspending the US on its military in terms of a percentage of GDP. You've got the Baltics, you've got the Scandinavian countries very cognizant of this. And then you've got the UK recognizing this, but having some financial issues. There is definitely a change in Europe, but it isn't right across Europe. But Germany seems to be at the heart of this recognition that Putin and Russia are the bad guys. Now, in that context, Sweden, we're going to go to Sweden near the city of Västerås. A Russian Orthodox church located just 300 meters from a strategically important airport is suspected of spying for Russia, according to France 24. The church by the airport inside Russia's suspected spy activities in Sweden. And this goes to the subject that is brought up oftentimes by GOP Republican MAGA types who claim that aren't Ukraine terrible because they have banned the Orthodox Church, without realizing that the Russian Orthodox Church is heavily involved in with the FSB. I mean, the Patriarch Kirill is a former FSB agent, for goodness sake. It's just this either not wanting to recognize what's going on, or just being not aware of it because they live in information bubbles that inoculate them and insulate them from reality. You've got to understand that Russia uses every single tool in its toolbox to be able to influence other nations. And here in Sweden, they're using the Orthodox Church. So that leads us on to this opinion piece in Politico that Vladimir Putin is spending millions of dollars bombarding European voters with manipulative social media and disinformation campaigns on a mass scale, and that is continuing all the time. It's a new type of warfare on democracy that eliminates the need to roll tanks into capitals. I said very early on in this war that if Russia spent all the money that they have spent on this war on disinformation and influence campaigns, they would have got way more bang for their buck. Way more. You can do far more damage. Look at what's going on in the United States, and we're going to go there in a second. The damage done to the United States in terms of getting in a government that is somewhat ideologically aligned to Russia, and helping that election, helping shape the disinformation landscape, or the information landscape, by these sorts of operations, enables or helps to enable the government that you see in the United States and the supporters that you see at the really loud and cultic supporters that you see at the MAGA end of the spectrum. That has been, I think, a result of a prepared context for this, and that preparation has come largely from Russia. So anyway, go and read that Politico opinion piece. But it is so true. They are just consistently fighting in the information spaces in a way that we are not. We are not combating or defending well enough against Russian bots and trolls and information projects. And we are not fighting back with our own narratives and techniques. We just sit and complain about it, all the while Elon Musk does nothing on his platform to stop. He complained. He said he wasn't going to buy Twitter originally, as he's trying to get out of it, because at the time he found out that there were too many, maybe as many as 5% of accounts were sock puppet accounts, were fake accounts. And he's like, that's just completely unacceptable. Then when he came in, he's like, I'm going to do something about that. And then he did the exact opposite. So now he is unregulated. He's deregulated the platform. He has taken away the moderation team, and he allows these entities to flourish, to absolutely flourish. In fact, he gives them incentive to do so. It is through the algorithm and through the way that it's monetized, you incentivize for this kind of rage farming and for this kind of divisive narrative peddling. Okay, then let's go back to see how Russia also plays the long game. They played the long game in terms of disinformation, and we can talk of that in the context of social media and platforms like Twitter. But then there's like the real people, like for example here. So Midas Matthew says, even I missed this one. This really, really effing explains much more than one major revolting level two-faced single FU faced position against, say, Ukraine and Kremlin-like actions. I mean, here's a bit of a rant here from Midas Matthew. Okay, what's he talking about? What explains the positioning of the American administration to some degree and the lack of pushback from many Republicans? 7 years ago today, actually yesterday I presume that is, 7 Republican lawmakers, including now Senate Majority Leader John Thune, so the guy who leads the Senate for the Republicans, the Majority Speaker in the Senate, John Thune, and 6 other Republicans celebrated the 4th of July, actually 2 days ago, in where? Moscow celebration. And there's Kennedy over there. You've got John Thune. Who is that? Surely that's not Kevin McCarthy. I hope not. Anyway, these Republicans in Moscow doing Moscow things, and yeah, I don't know. It gives me the creeps. That. So Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, I said the other day, I discussed Ukraine issues and tariff negotiations with the US President Trump. She's thought to be something of a Trump whisperer because she's in charge of Italy with a coalition of right-wing, basically populists. Her coalition is a pretty large coalition, 3-party coalition of right-wing populists. Brothers of Italy, Forza Italia, and Matteo Salvini's La Liga. And yeah, it's a bit of an uncomfortable relationship. People like Matteo Salvini, Deputy Prime Minister, is pro-Russian, and Italy should be helping Ukraine way more. There's a lot of rhetoric that comes from Meloni and people around her, but with her coalition partners mitigating against that rhetoric, it is potentially difficult for the Italian government to do as much to support Ukraine as some of them would like, and certainly we would like. There's a relationship with Russia that's interesting. I think Italy has long had a communist sympathy. You know, you can go back to Mussolini's time and look at there's obviously this strain of fascism, but there's also a strain of communism that has existed in Italy for some time. And I think that then means that there's quite a bit of alignment with Russia historically and culturally from some within Italy. So yeah, interesting place. Anyway, she has been trying to obviously talk about Ukraine and convince Trump over to supporting Ukraine more overtly. And also you have a growing division between the EU and the US concerning particularly tariffs and a trade war. So she's obviously got her work cut out for there. Now, Trump said he was unsure if he'd be able to end Russia's war against Ukraine, according to Politico. I mean, this is astounding. You've got a man that bombastically claimed that he could solve the war within 24 hours, possibly even before his inauguration on January the 20th. So even before he was going to take power, he said he could solve it within a day. 7 months later, that ain't happening. He is finding it very difficult because he knew nothing about the war in Ukraine. And I think he still knows not nearly enough. He's fed information by people around him. He has a recency bias, all the things that we so often talk about. These are the issues that lie at the heart of the Trump administration, lie at the heart of his own kind of tenure and his own relationship with so many other world leaders. He's just fundamentally ignorant, and that can be taken pejoratively, but I mean that really quite technically. Like, he literally doesn't know enough. He doesn't read, doesn't take intelligence briefings. He only gets information from the people around him, and those people around him, even the people, you say, okay, he's prodigious on social media, but actually most of what's written on social media won't be written by him. He'll sign it off, but he's playing golf, or he's flying on airplanes, or whatever. He's being. There are three guys, isn't there? There was Sebastian Gore. Is it Mike Shelf? Another guy, and these people. And you got, I think, Stephen Miller. So Stephen Miller is your policy guy. So he's like feeding all the policy. Let's attack immigrants and deport as many people as we can. He's like, yeah. Then you got Sebastian Gore that sets up all the people around him, like, employs all the people in the White House, and he's like totally ideologically aligned to Project 2025. And then you have the other guy, Mike Shelf, I think, all similar, and he's a guy that feeds Trump the news articles and the stuff, the excerpted things that feed into the ideology. So Trump is basically manipulated by these three people, and when he's away from those three people, when he goes to Vatican, when he goes to the Hague to NATO summit, when he goes to the G7, he sees other people, and those other people talk to him, and he's given actual information that accords with reality. And that's where you hear him say half decent things. Then he goes back to the White House, and he's ensconced in this really poisonous atmosphere, in this poisonous informational bubble. And he says these things. He doesn't understand the broader issues, say, for example, with the war in Ukraine. He doesn't understand Ukraine as a country. He doesn't understand its history, its culture, its politics, its history with Russia. He talks very simplistically about Ukraine, talks about these wonderful spires and this and that and getting crushed, and it's all the cities being turned to rubble and blah blah blah. And it's just like, well, it's not true. There are elements of that in Ukraine, of course, but you're lying, or you don't know what you're talking about. And in this case, I think it's the latter. We're going to talk about the former in terms of lying in a second. I don't know. I can't tell you whether or not it's going to happen. When asked if ending the war was a priority, the president said, yes, I'd like to see it happen. He's no more do you hear this I'm gonna solve it in 24 hours. And then he realized that was completely ridiculous. I mean, he genuinely thought that initially. Then he found out it was too difficult and said, I was being sarcastic. Except you can go and look at at least 25 times he said that in public at rallies and whatnot and in interviews, and it wasn't sarcastic. It 100% wasn't sarcastic. So he's lying about that. He genuinely thought he was going to be able to solve it really quickly, and he couldn't, because it's too difficult, because he's now understanding that geopolitics is a lot more complex than these simplistic transactional kind of relationships, and that it's not like you can screw over a competitor, a real estate mogul competitor in New York by doing some deal in 24 hours. It's going to screw him over or use some leverage against him. Like, this is international politics involving all sorts of different variables and different nations and different players, and it's just not that easy. So here we have a couple of articles we're just going to dip into. This is a Telegraph article, which is right-wing, normally aligned to republicanism, from the UK, though. Putin committed his outrage because he has every confidence that Mr. Trump will fail to exact any price. True, the American president might compose an angry social media post, but Putin is clearly convinced that nothing more will happen. So the article is called "Trump Could Be Running the Most Incompetent Peace Process in History. The US president's failure to exact a price on Putin's actions has given him the green light to ramp up attacks," giving Putin the green light. So to continue with Max 25 summarizes, with this extraordinary decision, Mr. Trump effectively informed Putin that America is content to leave Kyiv defenseless against Russian air attack. Putin responded entirely logically and ordered his biggest assault yet. By withholding the Patriots, Mr. Trump gave Putin the greenest light imaginable. The Kremlin will also have noticed that Mr. Trump has not imposed any new US sanctions on Russia since his return to the White House. Okay. So let's take that idea into the Atlantic piece by Anne Applebaum, married to Radoslaw Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister. She's an American intellectual and author, she said the US is switching sides. Now, we talked about this an awful lot, and many people like Timothy Snyder and others have been expressing this idea. And Phillips O'Brien here, Anne Applebaum puts it into an article in The Atlantic. The US is switching sides. Donald Trump is giving Vladimir Putin every incentive to keep killing Ukrainians. We're gonna excerpt some of this. So Putin sees what everyone else sees. Slowly, the US is switching sides. True, Trump occasionally berates Putin or makes sympathetic noises toward Ukrainians, as he did last week when he seemed to express interest in the Ukrainian journalist who said that her husband was in the military. Trump has also appeared to enjoy being flattered by at the NATO summit, where European leaders made a decision held as historic to further raise defence spending. But thanks to quieter decisions by members of his own administration, people whom he has appointed, the American realignment with Russia and against Ukraine and Europe, that's a key point there, against Europe, is gathering pace, not merely in rhetoric, but reality. She goes on to talk about the lack of any weaponry going to Ukraine, and not just the halt by Pete Hegseth and Elbridge Colby in the last week, which has been controversial enough. But of course, they've not given any military aid past what has already been appropriated since January the 20th. Like nothing. No extra sanctions. Nothing. Like, what explains that other than wanting to appease Russia? Then she goes on to talk about that and the reaction to that. And then she says, at the same time, and with much less publicity, the US is essentially lifting sanctions on Russia. No such formal announcement has been made, but the maintenance of sanctions requires constant shifts and adjustments as Russian companies and other entities change suppliers and tactics in order to acquire sanctioned products. During the Biden administration, I spoke several times with officials who followed these changes closely and who repeatedly issued new sanctions in order to counter them. New York Times has reported the Trump administration has stopped following these shifts and stopped imposing new sanctions altogether. This, the Times writes, allows, quote, new dummy companies to funnel funds and critical components to Russia, including computer chips and military equipment. I reported that the other day, how because they're not closing the loopholes on these sanctions, they're not enforcing them, you're getting these other entities popping up that are funneling these sanctioned microchips or whatever products through other countries, through these shell companies and to Russia. And so they've just found ways around it. Now, that was happening during the Biden administration, but then each time that was happening, the Biden administration would come down on those sanction evasion techniques and close the loopholes. That is not happening anymore. So those loopholes are effectively rendering the sanctions fairly meaningless. In addition to taking Russia's side in the kinetic war and the economic war, the US is realigning its position in the narrative war too. During the Biden administration, the State Department's Global Engagement Center regularly identified Russian disinformation operations around the world, exposing misleading websites in campaigns secretly run or directed by Russian operatives in Latin America and Africa, as well as in Europe, all of which I reported to you. In fact, the White House made statements about Latin America being a target for Russian disinformation, right? I reported that to you at the time. That's a result of the Global Engagement Center. It's a State Department's department that has now closed down. Trump appointees have not only dissolved the center, they also baselessly and bizarrely accused it of somehow harming American conservatives, even of having, quote, actively silenced and censored the voices of Americans, although the GEC had no operations inside the US. This is Vladimir Putin's wet dream here. This is just, he can't get any more out of the US, surely, than he's getting right now. This is beyond his wildest dreams. It's absolutely incredible what the US has done, but it doesn't stop there, of course, as we know. At the same time, cuts to USAID and other programs have abruptly reduced funding to some independent media and Russian opposition media. The planned cuts to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, if not stopped by the courts, will destroy one of the few outside sources of information that reaches Russians with real news about the war. Should all of these changes become permanent, the US will no longer have any tools available to communicate with the Russian public or counter Russian propaganda, either inside Russia or around the world. Which is why this article is titled as it is. The US is switching sides. Inside the United States, Russian propaganda is most loudly and effectively promoted by appointees of the US president. Steve Witkoff, the real estate developer that became Trump's main negotiator with Russia, despite having no knowledge of Russian history or politics, regularly echoes false Russian talking points and propaganda. He has repeated Putin's view, which he may have heard from the Russian president himself, that, quote, Ukraine is just a false country, that they just patched together in this sort of mosaic, these regions. Witkoff has also seemed to agree with Putin that Ukrainian territories that voted for independence from Moscow in 1991 are somehow Russian. By accepting disputed claims as fact, Witkoff is also helping Putin continue his war in order to keep Russians on board, to create divisions among Ukraine's allies, and maybe even to build doubts inside Ukraine itself. Putin needs to portray the Ukrainian cause as hopeless and to describe the Ukrainian demands as unreasonable. He has to hide the most basic facts about this war, and he began it, and he has killed hundreds of thousands of people in pursuit of it. And that his goal, again, is to destroy or decapitate all of Ukraine. Witkoff helps make these falsehoods easier to sustain in Russia and the US and in Europe. Now, I know many of you will not like me saying this, but the Trump administration, voting the Trump administration in, certainly, I mean, you can have your views on immigration, but even then I think you're veering, not you, but the administration is veering towards overt fascism with regard to their approach to immigration. But with regard to foreign policy, voting Trump in rather than Harris was terrible. Absolutely terrible. There is absolutely no evidence that Trump has done or wants to do anything positive for Ukraine. There just isn't any evidence. It is terrible what he is doing. Then we hear, and this might go back to the Biden administration, that Ukraine asked Poland for MiG-29 fighter jets, but the US blocked the request. According to Polish President Andrzej Duda, Ukraine has repeatedly asked Poland to hand over MiG-29s, as Ukrainian forces have trained pilots for these aircraft. I think they were wanting the replacement to the MiG-29s to be received before they sent these off to Ukraine. They still haven't got these Ukraine. And I'm not sure what's going on, because even the Euromaidan press, to which this is the reference, the article doesn't really go into much detail here about when and who in the US administration has stopped these MiG-29s going. There's this idea that the Americans told the Ukrainians to go to Poland, and Poland told the Ukrainians to go to the US to find out, what's going on with these. But anyway, really frustrating. Then we hear that BlackRock has halted its search for investors in Ukraine's reconstruction due to uncertainty over the country's future following Trump's election victory, according to Bloomberg. I mean, one of the best ways to find out whether Trump gives a flying fig about Ukraine is to look at what BlackRock's doing and look at whether the US as a whole, like broader idea of what the US is, like including BlackRock, are able or willing to stump up money for the reconstruction of Ukraine. And they stopped looking for that money when Trump took over. When Trump won the election, it was like, we're going to have to pump that to the long weeds, to the long grass, because it's not looking like it's going to happen. BlackRock Inc. halted its search for investors to back a multi-billion-dollar Ukraine recovery fund earlier this year after Donald Trump's election victory saw the US sour on the Eastern European country. People familiar with the discussion said the fund, meant to be unveiled at next week's Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome, was close to securing initial support from entities backed by governments of Germany, Italy and Poland. The people said declining to be identified, discussing private information. So this is just bad news for reconstruction for Ukraine, but reflective of the idea that people are not willing to stump up money because they know that the US is not supporting Ukraine. We talk about following the money. That's an interesting kind of view on following the money. Now I'm going to do my sidebar. And the sidebar is the US is in a bit of trouble at the moment. Now, there's so much I can talk about, and I've got a separate video coming up on so much US stuff going on. But let's just take the Texas horrific flooding that just took place. And then you've started to get MAGA politicians or wannabe politicians talking about how it's all fake weather, fake this, fake. And you're like, oh my goodness, that's already started. So then you got Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about geoengineering and the seeding. It was all seeded, like total conspiracy. She's a freaking serving. She's in charge of one of the committees, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's a serving representative, and she's like, it's as bad as Jewish space lasers. But the big, why am I telling you this? So this is all like a problem in the US, where it looks like everything's going to anti-establishment, anti-education, and anti-intellectualism, and anti-science, and anti-research, and anti-free speech, and anti-all of these things. And it's the US is moving further and further towards authoritarianism. And you can see this in something like the horrific death of all those people, including the Mystic camp, those girls' camp that was completely washed away, and all those children died. And it's this terrible thing in Texas that took place, and there was no prediction that was predicting these flash floods and the weather patterns. And people are like wondering why, and it's because the NOAA, so the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, basically the meteorological society, if you like, the Met Office for America, has been defunded, and FEMA's been defunded. So the people that clear up disaster areas, they've been defunded, and the people that predict weather patterns have been defunded. And it's all part of Project 2025, and it's all part of this, Christian nationalistic, authoritarian regime that they are trying to put in place. The ideological dismantling of NOAA and NWS, the National Weather Service, begins on page 674 of Project 2025 and is well underway. Go back to that 900-page document and look at, and we knew this, I reported before that they were defunding the NOAA. But the reason they're doing it is, so together, these form a colossal operation that has become one of the main drivers of the climate change alarm industry, and as such is harmful to future US prosperity. So climate change, or at least climate science, and people actually researching this, you can't give information that talks about climate change or proposes the theory of anthropogenic climate change, right? So human caused climate change. If you do that, you're destroying the US prosperity, right? Rather than supporting green industry and stuff like that, it's like we want to support the fossil fuels industry. And anything that goes against that is against US prosperity. And they're attacking the weather service. Why? Because they produce data that people in climate science, when you look at the patterns, they're like, well, look what's happened here, look what's happened there, look, oh, look, we synthesize all that data and it looks like there's climate change. Because that's problematic for Project 2025, for the 2025 and Trump administration, they'd rather just defund that. We'd rather not have the data, thank you very much. We'd rather bury our heads in the sand. So the industry's mission emphasis on prediction and management seems designed around the fatal conceit of planning for the unplannable. That is not to say NOAA is useless, but its current organisation corrupts its useful functions. It should be broken up and downsized. And they're talking about like privatising the NOAA and so on and so forth. Just absolutely horrific. And then it goes on and on. Just go and read it. It's written there for you. Here, Craig Collins says, you don't need to ask. It's right there. Starting on page 674 of Project 2025, they eliminated the NOAA and the NWS teams that track satellites, providing data on, well, they don't track the satellites. They track the satellite data, providing data on rapid and extreme weather events. Why? Because they might be predicting climate change. So the DoD is now not providing the NOAA with that satellite data and the NWS. So what happens? You get flash floods that kill loads of children in Texas. And then people like start blaming anyone but themselves. They start blaming anyone but the very politicians they put in to bring about this defunding. House Homeland Security Committee Democrats say, fun fact, Kristi Noem, the Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security, and Trump want to eliminate FEMA. So people that then go and clear all this mess up and leave states to fend for themselves. So they don't want a national version of this, leave it to states themselves. And of course, states that, that will really hurt particular states such as states in the, in your tornado alley type area and so on and so forth, Florida, certain other states around the panhandle, they're going to really suffer. And so nationalising that, having a federal system, allows the whole country to take the burden of those areas. You can make arguments either way, right? But essentially, they don't like government oversight. They don't like central government doing anything. But of course, the problem is that then this doesn't get done, people die, and it's total chaos. Noam says, and of course, FEMA is standing at an enhanced level right now, which means that they are plugged into the State Operations Centre. Their role will be continued to be filled as it always is, she says, after essentially trying to level best to defund it and destroy it. And then on the back of that, so I'm moving towards this kind of anti-intellectualism and then lying, which is how you get to authoritarian statehood, which is unreality, the kind of attack on truth. And this is Tim Burchett attacking truth here. And virtually everything he says here is actual lies, just lies. Or he's regurgitating other people's lies.
Well, that's one thing that the CBO and any of the bean counters never really take into consideration is the incredible economic outlook for our country. I mean, can you imagine energy if we remove a lot of bureaucracy? Our nuclear facilities take 8 to 10, maybe 15 years to get online. You've got a new man at the EPA that's turning them over.
Environmental Protection Authority. Every time that Trump gets in, he puts a fox in charge of hen house. Scott Pruitt in the first tenure was just like, let's put a fossil fuel person in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. Oh, we deregulated everything. Oh, they're putting slag into rivers again. Who knew? Oh well, there you go.
Pretty quick, and people are talking about coal again, which I think is great. God put it in the ground, let's use it. Everybody.
So we should use coal because God put it in the ground, right? Well, if that's your argument, and it wouldn't be mine as an atheist philosopher, if you use that argument, then God put wind in the air, or wind in the air, wind is air. Put wind on the planet, use it. Put sun in the solar system, use it. But of course, that's not convenient for him. God put coal in the ground. Didn't do all that. That was the devil. Devil did that. But God put the coal in the ground, so we should use coal. Okay, that doesn't work, that argument. But let's move on to what else you say, because you might save it now.
Across the world's using it, and they're passing us by. And the president wants to get out of bed with stuff that doesn't matter, like solar and wind.
He wants to get out of bed with stuff that doesn't matter. So he wants to disengage himself with solar and wind because it doesn't matter. Okay, well, I would contest that claim massively.
We haven't had a major discovery in solar in over 20 years, and wind is very subjective and it's very expensive, and there's a reason.
Okay, so it's very subjective and very expensive, so that's weird because what does it mean? It's very subjective. It makes sense. And no solar innovation in 20 years, no solar discovery. Just what are you talking about? Anyway, just want to correct some things here. Yes, renewable energy is generally cheaper than fossil fuels. In 2023, 96% of newly installed solar PV, photovoltaics, and onshore wind capacity had lower generation costs than new coal and natural gas. As of April 2025, power from new renewables is now cheaper than new fossil fuels in most places. Additionally, 81% of new renewable energy capacity produces power more cheaply than fossil fuels. This trend indicates a significant shift towards more cost-effective renewable energy resources. He's just talking absolute shite. But then the worst one is yet to come.
President Trump told me, I believe it was Thursday, that there's no windmills in China, but 99% of them that are sold are made in China. So I think there's a lot of things in there that are going to happen. And it's going to be great for this country.
So you're just regurgitating something that Trump told you, whispered in your ear on Thursday. Thursday, says the interviewer, Fox News, not challenging this at all. Right. So there are no windmills in China. Okay. But China makes all the windmills, but there are no windmills in China. So they don't install any of them. In 2022, China continued to have the highest wind power capacity in the world. Also in 2022, so this is 3 years old, it'll be more than that now, a total of 11,098 new wind turbines were installed. So just in 1 year, 11,000 wind turbines were installed, of which 695 were offshore, bringing the national total of operating turbines to 181,660. So in 2022, and that'll be different now, it'll be, probably over 200,000. Let's say they've got 200,000 wind turbines. He's saying they've got zero because Trump told me they've got zero. That is a lie, or you are regurgitating a lie, or Trump is regurgitating a lie. Someone is lying, and that's disinformation, and the rest might well become misinformation. This is bad news. Lies, untruths, mischaracterizations. That is at the heart of this government. When you have people speaking on Fox News, they are overtly not telling the truth. It should be incumbent upon Fox News to fact check the shit out of that and tell people the truth, because I'm fed up with people lying for their own ideological agenda. It is not good enough. So you add that together with what ICE is doing, and then you're finding out that now tourism has been massively hit. The US is the only country of 184 countries in the world facing tourism decline. Trump's policies have cost $29 billion in visitor revenue as tourists spurn the US. So that is something that's continually being taking place. A lot of flights down from places like Canada and Mexico. People are spurning the US. It's a kind of PR loss, but it's also a tourism dollar loss for the US. And then you have just this, which is an attack on democracy. Like, honestly, the reason I'm including this is in this video is because, we talk about how Ukraine is fighting for democracy against autocratic regime of Russia. And the biggest ally should be the beacon of democracy in the world that supposedly, the US, the land of the free, etc., etc., would take your huddled masses, but it's not that. So Donald Trump, as president of the United States, and he's talking about the primary election of Zohran Mamdani in New York City. So New York City Democrats have elected to run against whoever else in the election for mayor of New York, a guy who's quite progressive, right? Actually, the sort of thing he's asking for are pretty centrist stuff in Europe. But anyway, people are attacking him as being a communist, like Trump. But this kind of rhetoric, honestly, this is dictatorial. As president of the United States, I'm not going to let the communist lunatic destroy New York. Rest assured, I hold all the levers and have all the cards. I'll save New York City and make it hot and great again, just like I did with good old USA. He's now threatening to do something such that democracy cannot be fulfilled in New York. This is so worrying. Anyway, all the things with ICE, all the things with tourism and authoritarianism, and the attack on the NIH, so the funding for scientific research in the US, you've then had the EU and Ursula von der Leyen saying, you can come over here, guys, if you are a scientist that wants to continue doing the work that you're doing in a safe environment where you're going to be nurtured and supported in your striving for greater knowledge and understanding of how the world works, and your belief that the scientific method is something that we should all be invested in, you can come here, we'll support you more than we previously have done. So there's a bit of opportunism here from the EU, and they're starting to see it, as according to at least this Politico Pro piece. The first American scientific refugees arrive in France, as Chris says. Well, there's a headline. Wasn't on my 2025 bingo card. Another one. So Marseille University is wooing researchers who feel targeted by the Trump administration, and they are starting to get them. You are starting to see kind of scientific refugees come from the United States to Europe so they can do their thing. Just incredible. It's just an incredible state of play in the world at the moment. President Macron, Prime Minister Starmer are convening a new meeting on the coalition of willing, so that's back on the cards. It will take place in Britain on July the 10th. Macron held a conversation with Trump. Presidents discussed Ukraine, Iran, and the EU-US negotiations on tariffs. I wonder how far that went. Now, I talked to you the other day about Canada. Someone, I presume a Canadian, in my thread just threw this in. Take it with a pinch of salt. It's just someone that we don't know commenting in the comments thread. But I think it's interesting. We talked about I talked to you about how Mark Carney has taken over and done a bunch of stuff that's quietly got on with putting Canada in a very strong position. He's taken down the inter-province trade barriers. So within Canada, he's trying to make free trade more friction or less, more friction free, should we say. So he's doing all that. Then he signed this mining deal in Greenland. He signed a defense agreement with the EU, quietly getting on and doing this stuff to do with cooperation and alliances. Whereas the US is still going down the old, we're going to attack everyone, we're going to be talking bellicose rhetoric, and so on and so forth. Stay calm and Carney on. There is a bigger strategy at play here. Consider Prime Minister Carney, since March the 14th, has masterfully signed international agreements resulting in more than $111.2 billion of trade. Germany, $11.1 billion. Denmark, $1.5 billion. France, $1.2 billion. Australia, $9.5 billion. South Korea, $1.7 billion. Asia, $40 billion. Mexico, $20 billion. Brazil, $2 billion. Italy, $15.9 billion. Finland, $2.3 billion. UK, $700 million. Netherlands, $4.6 billion. India, $3 billion. The EU-Canada Pact on Defence, Trade, Tech and Climate, and a recommitment to an agreement with Jamaica, all while domestically getting the One Economy, so that's the trade barriers taken out within Canada bill, passed to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers, estimated to generate $200 billion for Canadian businesses, and to streamline approval processes for new projects. There is no question who is a master negotiator here. Carney is doing serious things to support the economy in Canada. He is trying to mitigate against what will be a trade war, what is a trade war, and what will be an uncomfortable trade war with the United States by doing all of this. The United States is going around just punching itself in the face repeatedly through all of its policies at the moment, while having a trade war with everyone in the world, trying to get rid of millions and millions of immigrants to the point where it will be inflationary, then having these trade wars with everyone, which is inflationary, then even doing the trade negotiation, the trade deal it sorted out with Vietnam is still inflationary. It's like the US is in a worse position after doing a trade deal with Vietnam than it was before. Just like, anyway, just the whole thing is just nuts. While Mark Carney is getting on and doing, like, I'm for globalism, getting together and working with other nations to solve global problems. Right, and there may be trade surplus imbalances that you can work on and tinker and this and that. But just going to war with all of your allies while supporting fricking Russia just seems utterly counterproductive to me. Now, Ukraine and Azerbaijan have agreed to strengthen cooperation in demining following a meeting between Ukrainian Ambassador Yuri Hutsiev and the head of Azerbaijan's Mine Action Agency. A bit of opportunism here where Azerbaijan and Armenia and possibly Kazakhstan to some degree are moving away from the Russian sphere of influence, and Ukraine has moved in. You've seen France move in and help Armenia out with their military, other nations getting involved, trying to woo these nations away from Russia, also possibly away from China as well. Now, the reactions from the Russians has been outstanding. It's been incredible. Not outstanding. The opposite. It's just bad, very bad, because they are using the rhetoric that we have seen them use with Ukraine. Russian propagandist Mardan, he's a guy that said horrific things about Ukraine previously, stated that Azerbaijan never existed. Same kind of rhetoric, says Anton Goroshenko, that Russia used and uses against or regarding Ukraine. Quote, I went and looked into it. Where is this history of great Azerbaijan that was supposedly interrupted by the Russian Empire's military intervention? I found nothing. There was no Azerbaijan, and I couldn't even find an ethnic group called Azerbaijanis. In fact, with all due respect, it seems that the very ethnic identity we now know as Azerbaijanis was apparently also invented by the Soviet authorities. Now, the problem is, like, we can talk about whether this stands up at all to historical analysis, his claims. I just want to point out the logical issues with his argument, which is that you can never start anything new. So Russia at one point came to be from non-Russia, right? If he's using that argument, then you can say, well, I've looked into it. Where is the history of Russia that was supposedly interrupted, blah, blah, blah. The idea is that he says, well, this didn't exist before, and before it was subsumed in this larger idea of Russia, and so therefore you can't have Azerbaijan. Absolute bollocks. If you want Azerbaijan, you can have Azerbaijan if the people living there, because they should have self-determination, think that they should have Azerbaijan. In the same way that Russians, when they first started, decided to have Russia or Muscovy or Great Britain or Ukraine or anywhere else. That's how self-determination works. But what you want is empire, where Russia and a cherry-picked understanding of what Russia is owns everything that you want them to own. absolute nonsense. And I'm going to leave you on a very negative, depressing idea. This is from Elliot Higgins. I interviewed him. Please go and check that out. It's on my live. I'll probably re-upload that as I did Kalon Robertson's. I've re-uploaded his, or Benny did, thank you, Benny, to the main kind of feed, if you like, because people often don't come across my live ones that have been live already. So that's why I'm doing that. You don't have to watch it if you've already watched it, obviously. Elliot Higgins says, because neoliberalism replaced empowered freedom with economic freedom, it hollowed out the democratic functions of public life, while at the same time failing to deliver and even betraying those functions at the institutional level. What's he really referring to? Well, young Europeans, according to The Guardian, are losing faith in democracy, according to a poll. Support is lowest in France, Spain and Poland, while 21% back authoritarian rule under certain circumstances. It's really dangerous. If you start saying authoritarianism is fine, a dictator's fine as long as that dictator agrees with me, then the idea of democracy is, I said this with UKIP, right? You guys know I'm not a fan of UKIP when they were really around. But I argued in 2016 time, or when it was that they were gaining more and more momentum, and I was saying, first past the post is the wrong democratic system. I've explained that to you before. We need proportional representation. Yeah, but Jono, you hate UKIP, and they would have had loads of MPs. Yes, they would have done, and I wouldn't have liked that. But I understand that democracy and representation is more important than me just deciding what I don't like shouldn't take place because I don't like it, and I should get to trump everyone else's wishes. Like, they had 4 million, 3.8 million, whatever it was, voters, and they had one MP, and that was only because he defected from the Tories. So they actually got 0 MPs elected from 4 million votes. And the Green Party had, what was it, 1.8 million votes, and they had one MP. So that was unfair. So I didn't like UKIP, but they should have way more MPs. Now that's me understanding that these ideas of democracy are bigger than my own wishes. Whereas if young people are now saying there's this more individualistic idea of reality, which is like what I want should be, which is like, well, yeah, but if I want, and this, we can go back to Trump, he's my guy. Like 5 years ago or 3 years ago, during Biden, you know, you would have Republicans railing against like dictators and look at all this like censorship and freedoms. We want freedoms. And as soon as their guy gets in, yeah, we don't mind if ICE can go around without due process. We don't mind if this leader can do all these things unilaterally because he's my guy. And that's freaking dangerous, because it's all right when it's your guy, but what about when it's the other guy? You'll be spitting a dummy then. You can't have one rule for you and one rule for someone else. So I might not like UKIP, but I definitely stand by their right to get people elected in. We see how they do, and if they cock it up, then we vote someone else in. That's freaking democracy, right? What you're seeing in the US at the moment is a veer away from democracy, which is my guy is a guy I want, and I don't care what the hell he does. If he breaks the law, I don't give a damn. If he becomes a dictator, I don't give a damn, because he's my dictator. No. No, that's not how it should be. Anyway, I worry. What do we do about this? Why is this happening? Something to look into in another video. Take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon.